Hello and welcome to the Art of Decluttering podcast. I am your host, Amy Revell. Welcome to another week of getting our lives under control, getting rid of the clutter in our lives so that we can do the things that matter the most. We want to play with our kids, we want to go on holidays, we want to enjoy our hobbies, we want to relax at night. I don't care if you want to binge watch shows, you're going to do even that better when you're not surrounded by clutter. Today's episode, I'm going to actually be going through an article that I found on the RACGP website, which is the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners. So this is fairly important. This is where GPs in Australia, this is where they're publishing articles and, they're doing research about things that impact people's general health. And so this is an article called What Clutter Does to Your Body and Brain. And I thought it was really helpful. Obviously, I can't go through the whole article, but what I'm going to do is pull out what I think are the main points. And you will have heard these things throughout different episodes of the podcast. Sometimes it's helpful to have them together. So you kind of see it and you're like, oh, I can see how all those things interact. But also, it's really helpful to know that this stuff is actually clinical. And it's not just professional organizers and minimalists out there saying, hey, this is really important, but actually doctors are saying that there are impacts on our well-being and on our physical health. So let's go through them. The first thing that I drew out of this article is that it talks about clutter drains your brain's mental energy. And the idea is that our brains naturally prefer order. So wherever possible, we like to try and put things in order. And often when we're asleep, that's what our brains are doing, is processing and categorizing and allowing our brains to kind of find a place for things to sit. And they wrote, when you're surrounded by clutter, your brain has to constantly process the visual information. So I did an episode on visual clutter and how exhausting that is. And it says that when you are trying to process this visual information, it drains cognitive resources and makes it harder to focus. So all of a sudden, straight from the beginning, we're talking about brain energy. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel like my brain energy is a limited resource. I'm recording this at the moment at 4:45 on a Friday evening because I found the article, read the article, and was so passionate about it. I was like, I said to Cal, I just need another 20 minutes. I've got to record this podcast because this is really important. But I know that by this time of the week, like my cognitive function is absolutely not at its peak performance. And so there is like this limited resource of brain function, and I don't want to use it. And I don't want you to use it on trying to just like process everything in my house as chaotic. And it is just taking up all of that mental energy. So the general practitioner article talks about it, clutter reducing working memory. So you might find it harder to remember things. You might find it harder to initiate the next task or remember where you were up to or gather that motivation to start a new task. And it talks about how every task, when you're surrounded by clutter, makes the task feel more overwhelming and harder than it needs to be. And anecdotally, I completely agree with that. That's what I see. That's what my team see every day when we're with clients. And it's great to see that that's actually recognized in a clinical setting as well. The absolute importance of reducing that clutter so that you have an increased capacity in your brain energy. Your brain energy, like, come on, let's clear that clutter so that we can have a bit of freedom in that. The second thing they talk about is clutter increasing stress and anxiety. We know that to be true. If you've got any clutter in your house, so even if it's just a spot of clutter, the stress and anxiety really builds up. And there's studies that have been done overseas. I'll put a link in the show notes to these different studies so you can go and look into them yourselves. Don't just take my word for it. Go and see what these clinical studies are doing. But that when we're surrounded by stress, our cortisol increases. So stress, let me read what they've written. Research shows people living in cluttered homes experience higher levels of cortisol, the body's primary stress response. Higher levels of cortisol have an effect on your mood, your emotional regulation, and your physical health. Like stress and anxiety is a medical issue. It's not just a mental health issue. It's also a medical issue. And one of the things that I really enjoy when I speak to clients, often it's when they're rebooking or they're coming back to me after 6 months and saying, hey, I'd love to tackle a new space with one of your team and we're booking that in. And they'll say to me, I've really noticed a difference in my stress and anxiety since we tackled that first space, or since I've learned how to keep my kitchen tidy, or since my bedroom is no longer a dumping ground for all of the unmade decisions during the day. And so if we can reduce your cortisol level, I mean, that is significant. And we can do that via decluttering and organizing. And one of the things that I really liked, they said that a chronically cluttered home environment can lead to a constant low grade fight or flight response. So you're constantly just feeling agitated, like that energy is just buzzing around in your body. And it doesn't need to be, because the clutter is not a predetermined situation. We can actually help you. You can help yourself to reduce that. They talk about clutter affecting our physical health. And I found this really interesting. I thought it was the perfect place to kind of get this research from, that a home that is impacted by excess clutter, and obviously what that excess clutter is not a predetermined amount. Obviously, that's what you're comfortable with and what you kind of feel is excess, whereas excess for me might be different to you. However, ongoing stress response affects your immune function, your digestion, and your risk of chronic disease. It's pretty confronting to think that the clutter in your home actually has physical health outcomes that are negative. Your immune function is down. You're at more risk of getting sick more often, or just things lingering on. Your digestion, that I found that really interesting. I would not have thought that the level of clutter in your home affects your digestion, but it makes sense. When your stress hormone is up, digestion doesn't work quite as well. When you're in fight mode, your body's like, hey, digestion, you're like priority down the list. We need to deal with the fight and flight that's right in front of us. What is this emergency? And I need to deal with that. And so when we're constantly dealing with that, when our whole house creates this fight or flight response, it makes sense that our digestion slows down, because our bodies don't feel safe to do what it needs to do. And risk of chronic disease. The researchers note that a stress load caused by clutter may confer higher risk of conditions like type 2 diabetes and heart disease over time. Now, I am not suggesting that just because you've got a cluttered space means that you're going to end up with any of these diseases, but there is a correlation, and it's a really important one to take note of, because you might be trying to do a whole lot of lifestyle changes around improving your physical health, but you didn't even consider the fact that when you go to bed at night, there's boxes of things you can't even remember, there's baskets of unsorted washing, there's presents you need to return, and you've got a bedroom of paperwork. Maybe those things are actually part of the holistic plan of you getting healthy and having good physical health. The clutter is actually holding you back from that. Oh my gosh, this is so good. Okay, this one I feel like we all know, clutter impacts sleep. I hear it from clients all the time. I especially hear it from children. I especially hear it from adults that have neurodiversity, is when they have a bedroom that has clutter in it, they find it much harder to fall asleep and stay asleep. And they're often waking up tired and fatigued. They're not waking up in an environment where they're like, oh, good, I feel fresh and ready to start the day. So I think that one's fairly obvious to me. We had a sleep expert on the podcast a few years ago. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. The next one, number 5, was clutter influences behavior and decision making. So when you think about, you've got lots of decisions to make during the day, and every time you see clutter, you have to make a decision to either ignore it or to do something about it. Now, if you're walking past clutter 10 times a day and you're having to make that decision over and over and over again, I'm going to ignore that, I'm not going to do anything about it, that takes away your ability to make good decisions in other areas. So the studies found that in cluttered environments, people are more likely to snack on unhealthy food. Now, I just have to stop and say, this is huge. If you have a cluttered kitchen, a cluttered pantry, and this is talking about cluttered environments as a whole, I see it specifically in kitchens and pantries. If it's too hard for you to prepare a meal for your family, if it's too hard for you to make a salad, if there's no bench space for you to prepare your food, likely to go for unhealthy snacks. Having an organized kitchen and pantry and home really does impact that. So it says studies have found that in cluttered environments, people are more likely to snack on unhealthy foods, are more likely to be less productive. That's huge. If you work from home, if you're an employer whose employees work from home, maybe the greatest gift you can give them is organize a session for each of your staff that work from home. That will increase their productivity, it will increase their mood, it will increase their well-being, and ultimately that helps them to contribute to your company in a really productive and healthy way. And people living in cluttered environments are also more likely to procrastinate or avoid tasks. And often the first task you're avoiding is actually the decluttering, or it might be the organizing you're avoiding, but you kind of feel so overwhelmed that your decision making is just not there for the other areas of your home that you actually need to attend to. The next thing they note is that clutter affects relationships. One study found that when people watched a movie while they were sitting in a cluttered environment, they were less able to correctly interpret the emotions on characters' faces. I'm going to read that again. One study found that when people watched a movie in a cluttered environment, they were less able to correctly interpret the emotions on characters' faces. So, clutter subtly, in ways we wouldn't even expect, I would not have picked this one either, can impact our ability to connect well with others. And so it might be that you're feeling misunderstood or that there's conflict in the home. How I also see it in the client sessions that we do is that there's tension over that's your mess, that's my mess. Why can't we keep on top of it? That's your things I've been telling you. And there's this back and forth, like internal relational conflict. And that really does have an impact on us. But the fact that it actually affected people's ability to recognize emotions, oh my gosh, that's huge. The next one, and I found this interesting as well, is letting go of clutter for some people actually is painful. So this was around people that specifically had been diagnosed with hoarding disorder. And not just hoarding disorder, but people with hoarding disorder and those with hoarding tendencies. And it showed that brain scans showed that discarding possessions activates brain regions associated with physical pain. So as they're having to discard possessions, it's physically painful. And that might be a reason that people find it really hard. So it's not just, it's never just laziness or lack of motivation. Sometimes the reasons that people have cluttered environments, it runs deep, it's traumatic, or in this instance, it may cause physical pain. And so it's understandable that's hard to do on your own. So it might be about finding someone that can come alongside you. There are definitely psychologists trained in hoarding disorder, professional organizers trained in hoarding disorder, occupational therapists trained in hoarding disorder, social workers trained in hoarding disorder. So there's lots of different specialists that you can bring alongside your health journey when it comes to clutter, because feeling physical pain, we don't want that for you. How do you reduce that? And you can work with a professional on that. One of the things that I also found really interesting in the article is it mentioned that for some people, a messy environment can actually spark creativity. So it was kind of saying, like, here's all the things that are negative on our health and well-being when it comes to clutter. However, a bit of mess occasionally can spark creativity. So it might be that you're a creative person and you don't want to have like a minimalist desk, or you don't want to have, you're working on something on the kitchen table and you don't want to have everything perfect. You need to have a little bit of craziness around you in order to channel your creativity. So I like that. I like that it wasn't an article of like, here's all the reasons that clutter is bad, but it did differentiate between mess and clutter. Mess is something you can generally tidy up when you're done. Clutter is like this ongoing battle of like things don't have homes and things are in places where they shouldn't be. I'm keeping things I shouldn't need. Whereas mess is often like, these are the things I'm using or I do need. I actually just haven't put them away yet. And so that is a distinction to think about. But, you don't have to always have pristine, perfect houses. Like, that's the reality of living with other people usually. But the impact of this chronic clutter on your mental health, on your relationships, on your sleep, on your physical health, on your brain health, on your ability to make decisions. It was so good to see this. This Australian College for General Practitioners say, hey, this is really significant and something worth paying attention to. So clutter just isn't about having a bit of mess in your home. It overloads your brain, increases stress hormones, disrupts sleep, influences behavior, and can have negative impacts on relationship. What I hope that, reading through this article together and unpacking it a little bit does for you is it gives you just another little push in the right direction to reduce the clutter in your home. It might be you've identified one of those risks and you're like, yeah, I don't want that. I don't want that for me. I actually want my family to be able to make decisions freely, to have brain space left for each other at the end of the day, to not feel like this constant fight or flight, this stress hormones is always elevated. And so once you kind of identify what that is, then great, let's take the next step together. You can come and you can find me on Facebook, or, jump onto my website, find me on Instagram, find me on YouTube, wherever you are. That's where I am. And, play along at home, listen to the podcast, come and join a course, have one of our team out to help you. If you're in Melbourne, Australia, we work with clients to reduce these risks because we care. We care about people. It's not about the stuff. We don't do our job because of the stuff. We do our job because we care about people. And I was just super excited to find this article as well. So be encouraged. I hope that spurred you on a little bit. And until next week, enjoy the freedom.